In the spring of 2011, the then CIA director, Leon Panetta, approached President Obama with a new development in the war on terror. The CIA had credible evidence that Osama bin Laden was in a safe house in Pakistan. Killing bin Laden would have been an enormous foreign policy victory for the Obama administration, as bin Laden, who was the mastermind behind 9/11, had escaped US forces when they invaded Afghanistan. Obama asked the various analysts on whether bin Laden was in fact in the safe house. If he was going to order a secret mission and potentially targeted assassination on foreign soil, he wanted to make sure he had the best possible information. After listening to the analysts express their thoughts, Obama responded, "This sounds like a 50-50 proposition. Look, it's like a flip of the coin. I can't base this decision on the notion that we don't have greater certainty than that." Now, we all know that Obama greenlit the mission and bin Laden was killed in May of 2011. The question is, did Obama make the right decision based on the information that he had? Let's hold that thought for a minute, and I'm going to come back to it. I'm a sucker for books about the science of decision-making and predictions and metacognition, the idea of thinking about thinking. Decisions of any importance are almost always based on incomplete information. Being able to make a better decision while recognizing that we cannot always predict the future would obviously be something and a skill worth improving. A number of books have come out in the past few years that reveal just how precarious and shaking our thinking typically is. Perhaps the most well-known is Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, which demonstrates that we are constantly bombarded with cognitive biases that undermine our ability to think rationally about the world. If you read his work, it's amazing that we ever make rational decisions at all. Another book that explores this phenomenon is called Super Forecasting: The Art and Science of Prediction by Philip Tetlock and Dan Gardner. This is the book from which the anecdote about the decision to find bin Laden was in. The book is based on the work of Philip Tetlock, who put together a team of ordinary people over the last 20-25 years, some of whom became what he called super forecasters, for their ability to make better and more accurate predictions than intelligence analysts, despite having no formal training nor access to the kind of information available to the US government. As high school seniors, each of you has a critical decision to make in the next few months: what you plan to do next year. For most of you, that involves selecting a college. For some, it may be a gap year or some other path for your future. While I can't do justice to all the points and details made in his book, I thought I would share with you the key lessons from the Super Forecasting book about how to go about making better predictions and decisions with respect to college and any other important decision in your life. My one caveat is that if any of my suggestions contradict advice from college counseling, follow the college counseling advice. I'm hopeful, though, especially as a parent who had 2 kids go through the college counseling process in the last several years, that my observations will bring some science to support many of the things that your college counselors are already telling you. Tetlock identified 5 major factors that were shared by super forecasters. Remember, these were individuals who volunteered for his project and consistently scored in the top range of predictions about a large number of foreign policy and other issues with no formal training, and engaged in this entirely randomly volunteers. And yet his top teams consistently outperformed CIA and NSA analysts predicting the outcome of things like Brexit, whether China would build islands in the South China Sea, even the 2016 election. So the first factor is a fairly straightforward one. Most super forecasters are generally intelligent. They were people from mostly white-collar professionals, business, law, academia, but they weren't geniuses. Everybody in this room is capable of being a super forecaster just based on the fact of where you are and the kinds of experiences that you've had. Now, this next one will really make the math teachers in the room happy. The super forecasters all had a very good facility with numeracy, basic ideas of mathematics. Now again, they were not mathematicians by any stretch of the imagination, but they were people who understood key mathematical concepts, especially the notion of probabilities. Just think about how over the last year and a half we have been bombarded with information during the COVID pandemic, and the ability to sift through that and look at some of the trends with a mathematical lens would be especially helpful. Super forecasters would recognize that the major issue with COVID initially was not so much case percentage rates, because we weren't testing that many people. It was hospitalization rates was the number that you really needed to pay attention to. So it was these kinds of things that super forecasters are very good at discerning. Now, one thing that they did was they would assign a probability to events or outcomes. Most of us, when we're asked to make a prediction, simply say, well, it's either going to happen or it's not going to happen, or 50-50. Super forecasters never were that vague. They would make fairly specific percentages on what the outcome of a particular situation might be. And so going back to the Obama anecdote, when Obama asked the analysts for their predictions, almost all of them, and if he converged the amount, said the probability that bin Laden was there was 80% or better. So bin Laden certainly made the right decision from a probability standpoint, but his analysis that it was a 50-50 choice was not necessarily accurate. Another important factor to understand is that you don't assess the merits of a decision based on the outcome. Any poker player knows this. Many people learned this also in the aftermath of the 2016 election. Websites like 538 tried to explain that their forecasting model the day before the election actually gave Trump a 28.6% chance to win. Hardly the slam dunk that most people had presumed. Believing Hillary Clinton would win that was a safe bet, but it was not remotely implausible that Trump was going to have the victory. Even media outlets like the New York Times, whose projections were heavily criticized in the aftermath, had revised their forecast to 85% from a high of 93% just a week or so earlier. And that brings us to the third factor that makes super forecasters particularly effective. They have an active and open growth mindset with respect to their predictions. Perhaps one of the most critical characteristics was their willingness to change their mind based on new information. Revising predictions in the wake of new data, new views, or new analysis is a hallmark of super forecasters. We often get stuck in our initial impression, and most of us fail to make adjustments when the facts on the ground have changed. Monitoring and constantly practicing, analyzing, and learning from your mistakes is essential to better predictions and good decision making. You need to be able to make granular judgments and update constantly. So many pundits who make predictions in the media, whether on TV or in print, are never actually called to account for their failed predictions. Tetlock actually looked at predictions made over time in many media forums and concluded that they were no better than a chimp throwing darts at a dartboard. Ironically, one of Tetlock's observations was that unlike government intelligence analysts, super forecasters did not have an emotional or work-related stake in a particular outcome, which might have made their ability to switch gears easier. If you've been staking your professional reputation for months that such and such an outcome is likely to occur, you will be more likely to be blinded by cognitive biases when weighing information that supports your favorite outcome. We've all seen this over and over again in the optimistic military projections, whether in Vietnam, Iraq, and most recently Afghanistan. So how do they do this? Another factor is that super forecasters are news junkies. They constantly take in new information. They consume and read lots of things that bear on the potential prediction they're asked to make. Clearly, there's an element of intelligence to discern this new information and whether it's relevant or not, but by seeking it out and being able to incorporate that into their forecasting models, they continually refine and update their predictions. And most of them didn't do this once or twice. They would do this dozens of times as the prediction came closer and closer to the time period when it was either going to be revealed that they were right or they were wrong. In some sense, this is perhaps the most easiest but overlooked aspect of being a super forecaster, just the pure grind of hard work and perseverance needed to squeeze the most out of what is always incomplete information available. And then the last one is that super forecasters worked best in teams. The value of group work and working in teams provided that the environment was conducive to constructive criticism and input. Make teams more accurate than individuals. That caveat's important because if the culture of the team is not oriented towards accuracy and honest evaluation, the benefits wouldn't be as significant. But the best super forecasters ruthlessly subjected their predictions to others on the team for feedback, criticism, and suggestions. These groups outperformed even the top individual super forecasters who didn't get that final advantage. Now, if you go back and think about your original decision and think carefully about the courses of actions you're deciding, I'm hoping that this exercise can help frame your decision in the case of college applications a little bit better. It can be helpful to be a little bit more detached, ironically, and frame this as somewhat of a binary decision. Will you, if you attend X school, be happy and challenged at that school? Now, as you go about making that what is essentially a prediction, which your decision might follow from, ask yourself the following questions from the mindset of a super forecaster. You're all obviously intelligent enough to make such an evaluation. You know yourselves best, even if you're uncertain about some of your preferences. Do you really want to live in a city, or does it just sound cool to live in a city? Will you feel lost in a large school, or are you confident that you can navigate that environment? Is the academic or social environment most important to you? Be honest. With respect to probability, and this is probably the weirdest one, can you actually assign a percentage at various schools and how likely you will be to be happy there? This seems like a crazy exercise, but if you give it a try, it's okay to assign just a ballpark number because remember, you're going to be revising that number over time. And are you willing to adjust your expectations as you go through the process? Are you open-minded or are you dead set on the school you would always thought that you would attend? Coming to the conclusion that your dream school may be out of reach may be disappointing, but there are so many fantastic colleges out there that if you keep an open mind, there's definitely one and a right one for you. Are you willing to seek out new information and update your decisions? What if your campus visit to your dream school underwhelmed you? What if you learn a lot of new positive information about a school you had never considered before? Have you done all your due diligence, attending webinars, reading materials, talking to alumni, making visits? When I was a senior in high school, I wanted to go to West Point. I actually got a letter from my congressman. And then I read the actual materials from West Point about what it was I was expected to do before I got there. Needless to say, I did not go to West Point. Are you willing to work closely with your college advisor? Get input from family, friends, teachers about schools that you might be interested in. While ultimately you may make this decision alone, are you willing to recognize that others may know things about you or have useful advice you hadn't considered? The school I ended up going to was one that was recommended to me by a very close friend who I had grown up with, whose mother said, "Oh, Steve, Middlebury would be a great school for you." I had never heard of that school. If you can act decisively, and when all is said and done, put your best foot forward, confident you've done everything you can to make the best decision, I think you'll be the better for it. This is another time for super forecasters, whether President Obama incorporated that fact that a majority of his analysts strongly believe their intelligence, we don't know, but he did make ultimately a good decision. If you can systematize and apply this kind of thinking to all your major decisions, I think you'll be surprised by how much more confident and satisfied you'll be, even when the prediction and outcome doesn't necessarily come to pass. Thank you.